All right, hi everyone. I am sitting down here via Zoom with Yevgeniy Milyavskiy, who is this year's PianoSpheres satellite artist, and today we're going to talk about his program. So let's begin with the entire program, Evgeny, and how it all came together.
Okay, the program came together from to include very prominent composers: Shostakovich, Pierre Boulez, Georgy Ligeti, Elliott Carter, and of course the commission from PianoSpheres, David Gesser. Uh, the way the program came to be is really I was looking for something that can be influenced by Franz Liszt's idea of piano virtuosity. And there hasn't really been such an icon. I mean, maybe Horowitz also. And so I picked music that was all on key, that doesn't have extended techniques. There are modern trends in music towards oversaturation, saturation in general. Composers such as Brian Ferneyhoff or Raphael Sendo, and I really enjoy that. I think it's fascinating. Their idea of pushing the sound envelope to its most extreme. And so I picked works that were very virtuosic. The Shostakovich Sonata, Boulez in Cis, Carter Catenaire, Ligeti Two Etudes, and I picked bagatelles from the David Gesser Commission that were also very virtuosic. So these works both, Shostakovich himself was also a great piano virtuoso who participated in the Chopin piano competition in the 20s, right around the time when he composed the first piano sonata. And so I hope these works can impact the audience and create a somewhat romantic emotional response to the pure virtuosity of piano sound.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the performance because I know a lot of these pieces, and a lot of them are fiendishly difficult, like really hard pieces. So I'm just looking forward to hearing you play these things. So let's begin with the Shostakovich Piano Sonata. What can you tell us about this piece?
Can I actually add something else?
Please add it.
In this day and age, the virtuosity, when we think of composers like Raphael Sandor, Bedrosian, Frank Bedrosian, or Brian Ferneyhoff, James Dillon, their virtuosity, it absolutely knows no bounds. And from my perspective, the composers that I picked, they're like household names already in 2021, 2020, 2021. They're not old pieces by any means. They're new pieces. They wrote them recently. But from my perspective, they have a more romantic sound because they don't use extended techniques. And they're also, from my perspective, kind of standards of piano literature that should be really known and appreciated by the public. Kind of like, the Liszt Sonata or Rachmaninoff Piano Sonata, and that's I consider these works to be on the same level, but from a little bit more cubist and modern perspective.
Great. Well, speaking of sonatas, let's talk about now about the Piano Sonata Number 1 by Shostakovich. Tell us about this piece.
Well, the piece was written in 1926 by a very young Shostakovich. He was 19 years old, and he was going to the Chopin piano competition, so he really showed off his virtuosity. This is a one-movement sonata. What we hear are three parts: fast, slow, fast. But it's in one movement. It's about 10, 12 minutes of complete wild chords and harmonies and chromaticism and fugal material, imitation, counterpoint. It goes back to Bach in its opening. There's a fugal material. There's a theme in the opening that reminds us of Bach in the way it's written out, but there's just a wild rhythm, he writes wild time signatures, and they're changing quite often later on in the sonata. And it was really, I think, at the same time there were trends like Schoenberg's atonal works in Germany that were completely new to the audience. And so I think this reflects the Soviet kind of industrial Soviet time of development in the Soviet Union of both mechanization and trends in the art that reflect that. And I think this sonata is a great reflection of that.
Absolutely. That leads us right into the program, into the 24 Preludes by Shostakovich, one of my absolute favorite collection of pieces. Tell us about this, the whole collection, and maybe a few that really stand out to you.
Well, the collection is really famous as violin pieces. For those that aren't as familiar with the Shostakovich preludes, they were later transcribed by a peer of Shostakovich for violin, and that's how a lot of people really know them, from famous performances on the violin. But I chose to play the entire set, all 24 preludes. They are reminiscent of Bach preludes and fugues, of Chopin preludes. They are all 20. They are in all 12 keys, and they go by the circle of fifths. So the first one is C major, then we have the relative minor, A minor, then you have G major, and you have the relative minor, E minor, and then D major, and so on around the entire circle of fifths. They're character pieces. Each one has a distinct character. They're very balletic in many ways. They reflect dance music. In some places, they reflect, kind of like, they almost sound like circus music. They're just really ironic, sarcastic reflections and pictures of the Soviet era. They were written in 1932, 1933, and he wrote all of them rather quickly, within a year. And so they're not so far away from the piano sonata, but in terms of sound, they're like in my program, they're a sort of lull, reflective period that joined together with the sonata, they form a very complete picture of Shostakovich as a pianist and as a composer.
Yeah, awesome. I can't wait to hear those. I especially love the last one. Such a cool piece.
Yes.
Okay, so that leads us to the two Ligeti etudes. Oh man, the Ligeti etudes. Love these pieces. Why'd you choose these two?
Okay, I chose two Ligeti etudes, Galamborong, which is from Book 2, number 7, and Autumn in Warsaw, which is Book 1, number 6. And I'm playing them backwards to be more effective with the audience, because the first one, to me, is like an impressionistic. Galamborong means melancholic pigeon, so it's an absurd title, and it's influenced very much by Javanese or Indonesian gamelan music. You have these sound like metal gongs and bells and xylophone type, marimba type instruments, and it's a continuous 16th note pattern that goes on with these off pulse chords. What I like about this etude is that I think it's influenced by minimalism and looks forward toward American composition in that sense. For me, I'd like to speak a little bit more about the program. Actually, it's biographical in the sense that I was born in the Soviet Union, and so I picked pieces that were, it starts with Shostakovich, who's a Soviet composer. Then it goes on to Ligeti, who's a Eastern European composer. Then I play Pierre Boulez, who's a Western European composer. And then Elliott Carter and David Gesser, who are American composers. And so I like to think that each piece has a link with the next one and with all of them. And it forms kind of a complete opus in my mind. And I hope the audience can get a feel for that as they listen to it. So the Ligeti etude looks forward towards American minimalism, composers like, Reich, Philip Glass, and I find it absolutely fascinating. In the wild, it's a pentatonic, two whole tone scales split between the hands to form completely wild key signatures that haven't existed before. He writes flats on specific notes and doesn't use a standard key signature, so the notation is bizarrely difficult and requires, adaptation to learn the etude. The second etude, Autumn in Warsaw, to me is very important because of the festival that it's named after, the Warsaw Autumn. It's a contemporary music festival, and I think this etude captures the difficulty maybe that Soviet composers had because of being in the Soviet Union with limits they had on how much Western composition they were exposed to. And I think this is a point of strength of Gheorghe Ligeti to make this music with the lament motif. There's a 4-note descending motif at the beginning of the etude, and he makes it prominent throughout the etude. To me, it's reminiscent of Rachmaninoff or Bach. And it's a fugal etude, and the cross pulses and the rhythms are absolutely wild. That's formed by these multiple voices in both hands. Now, the other thing is about my program, the first half is Shostakovich, so it's music written before I was born. The second half, it's not so much divided into halves because it's a virtual concert this year, but there's still two clear halves, which is Shostakovich and the others. And all the other composers, Boulez, Ligeti, Carter, and Gesser, they wrote music that was written after I was born. So that to me is a different kind of personal involvement. It's like I wanted to capture this program, reflected through a prism of looking through the past, from Shostakovich, connected to the work that was commissioned specifically for this concert. And so I hope the audience can also feel this kind of like a time travel. And it's influenced very much by a standard classical piano recital. There's a 45-minute first half, Shostakovich, and a 30-minute second half, which is all modern, more modern music, written after 1980. And even though the format is rather strict, I hope the audience can appreciate these works for how absolutely wild they are.
Yeah, so speaking a little bit wild, the Boulez and Carter are kind of linked a little bit in their sentiment, both kind of short works, both very virtuosic. Can you talk about these two pieces?
Yes, absolutely. I chose Boulez and Carter because of contemporary influence on my pianism. Gloria Chang really influenced me when I was a student at UCLA to play Pierre Boulez and to study Pierre Boulez. And I played the first piano sonata there for a DMA recital, and I played Derive with a chamber ensemble. Elliott Carter I met when I was at Tanglewood in 2006. And this piece, Catenaire, is from around that period in Elliott Carter's life. So these are composers who I value very much, who I formed a personal relationship with, their music. A little bit about the pieces themselves. In Cis, there's one translation that's interpolations of the title. The other translation that I like to think of is like a wood engraving or an etching, something like that. So in Cis, they're like incisions. Now, they don't have to be medical incisions or surgical incisions, but there's a precision to this piece and to the virtuosity and how many notes are written and how they're written that that is very much, to me, that's very much like a wood engraving or an etching. The Carter piece, catenaires, means curved shapes. Now, the other translation from a Russian perspective, catenaires means a connected line. And that is like a railroad. Now, that connects back to the Shostakovich Sonata because of the kind of mechanization and industrialization in the Shostakovich Sonata. It sounds a lot like trains going by with the heavy chords and solid rhythm. Now, the Carter is about 3.5 minutes of non-stop toccata writing that's very much reminiscent of a railroad.
Great. So then the concert ends with the David Gesser PianoSpheres commission and world premiere of the selections from Bagatelles. Tell us about this piece and about David Gesser.
David Gesser is a wonderful composer who I met at UCLA. He wrote the song that was used for the virtual graduation this year, and and he wrote other songs which sound absolutely nothing like his piano music, but it's really interesting to me because the songs are very much about, healing people's soul in this troubled time. And to me, I relate David Gesser's bagatelles to Mozart. First of all, the genre itself is very classic, and this I'd like to say one more thing about the program. The program is a mixture of genres that reflect classic piano literature. You know, sonata, preludes, bagatelles, etudes, and then there's the abstract pieces by Boulez and Carter in Cease and Catenaires, which don't have traditional form. And so the bagatelles have a very traditional form that goes back to Beethoven bagatelles, to the Ligeti wind bagatelles, and those are all influences of David Gesser. And they're very much like Mozart in that when they stay in the measure, there's a definite change of mood. They're dance-like, and then they're not. They're serious, and then they're not. There's always something dark and somber underneath all of them. And it's a very attractive quality of him as a composer, to me.
Well, really looking forward to your recital, Evgeny. By the looks of it, it's going to be fast-fingered, high-flying, virtuosic, and I can't wait. Thank you for chatting with me today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kotcheff.